After 60 days of no alcohol, I've decided to quit forever. So you go to a restaurant, usually the first thing they give you is a menu for drinks. They ask you, what did you like to drink first? And I started questioning that. Then I started wondering, why do I drink? What's the point of it? Doesn't make me feel good. It makes me feel good for a few hours, maybe if I'm lucky. But often it's kind of a downhill spiral from there. So I started asking, is it validation from friends? Are there any upsides to drinking? About last year, I started to say no to drinks more often. If I was hanging out with friends, I'm just like, I'll just take some sparkling water with a lemon in it so it can look like I'm drinking. Whenever there was an open bar, I'd say no because I think that's dangerous. You tend to start with one drink. It's easy to go for many when you're not paying for it. And I started wondering, is it really weird to say I don't drink when you're out? Maybe to some, it's becoming more common nowadays, especially if you live in a city. Most people really don't care, and some people look at you weird. A brief history of alcohol. So our monkey brethren would eat slightly rotten fruit on the ground, which they made them feel a little woozy, and they really enjoyed that feeling. If you look back historically of our findings on alcohol and where it began, it's actually the Chinese that started it, and they started distilling alcohol in huge vases, and that's where they found residue, which we know can date back to the 1st century. And they started this certain process by fermenting rice, millet, grapes, and honey. Around 5,000 years ago, cultures around the world began to ferment their own variety of grains, fruit to make alcohol. Example would be the Egyptians. They used cereal grains to make beer, which was part of their daily rations for calories. In Egypt, rich people got wine. So the pharaohs and their court, it was very rare to have wine in Egypt since it didn't grow too well there. Wine was abundant in Greece, which is why we believe, at least history shows, that a lot of our alcohol comes from variety across the world. When we look back at the history, people were able to drink a lot more and get drunk less because of the lower percentages of the alcohol content within these drinks. Everything changed with the distillation process in the 1950s. We would boil the alcohol into a vapor, capturing the alcohol content and then cooling it down into a liquid form. And this is how we've come to the content that we see today. Historically, stronger spirits were used for medicinal purposes, and that has changed a lot over the last few years. But our biggest reason for pursuing alcohol is because it made us feel different. I mean, if you look at everything, we love to take all kinds of drugs that change our mind, like psychedelics. And some cultures use alcohol as a rite of passage, especially in the Western society. If you're young, you're out at a party with your friends and somehow they got their hands on some alcohol and you're 15, 16, and you're going to drink because your peers are looking to you, and if you say no to that, you don't want to feel like you're out of the pack or out of the group. But the dark side to alcohol that we tend to ignore is how it's destroyed families for decades. You see it on TV and movies, yet we continue to drink and we continue to use it during celebratory processes. It is ingrained in our society and normalized for the most part. We celebrate with alcohol, we combine fun with alcohol, we drink when we're sad, we use it as a crutch for many things. Okay, so that's the history, but where are we as a society? The problems with alcohol. With the recent ending or conclusion of the pandemic over the last 3 years, the pandemic led to more alcohol consumption and worsening of depressive episodes and symptoms and deaths. Based on the research and data I found, deaths from alcohol-related liver disease raised about 22.4%. And it's no wonder that we use alcohol, and there seems to be an uprising of non-alcoholic beverages. I'm noticing them more in restaurants. Whole Foods even they have like all kinds of cocktails, mocktails you can create that makes it look really cool, but doesn't contain alcohol content. Over the years, the reason why alcohol became such a thing is because marketing made it look cool. And I learned about this first about a year ago when my partner was reading a book called Quit Like a Woman. And from that book, I learned how alcohol was normalized as a reward. Look at shows like Mad Men, any other shows and movies that show them drinking when they achieve something and everything like this. It just makes things even more interesting. You think how beer is marketed to men, the Dos Equis commercials really show that you can be the most interesting man in the world. They made it look really cool to drink. Wine is usually marketed and targeted to women most of the time. Even famous people utilize this. Adele has a new song called I Drink Wine. And you see it a lot in your favorite TV shows and your movies. It's literally everywhere in your face all the time, to the point that successful people have even created their own brands. Think Kendall Jenner with her 818 tequila, or The Rock with his Terramana tequila, or Ryan Reynolds with his Aviation gin. And seeing all this branding over the last few years and really understanding the psychology behind how marketing tends to work on our brain, it made me really think about how alcohol affects the body and what are the short and long-term consequences of drinking based on my experiences in my family, friends' families, and just seeing people drunk when I was young in parties and things like that. A few months back, one of my favorite scientists today, Andrew Huberman, actually made a really long-form podcast, 2-hour podcast on this, which I listened to again for this video. So I decided to take a few clips from this podcast. So you don't have to unless you absolutely want to. It's linked in the description. But I wanted to just share a few clips on what alcohol does to the body and its consequences.
Even for people that were drinking low to moderate amounts of alcohol, so 1 or 2 drinks per day, there was evidence of thinning of the neocortex, so loss of neurons in the neocortex, and other brain regions. And I don't say this in order to cause alarm. I tell you this because they are important data, because they reveal and indeed answer the question that has been burning for so long, whether or not chronic alcohol intake can disrupt the brain, even if the chronic intake is very low.
So your brain degrades with alcohol?
Kill bacteria, and as you'll soon find out, the fact that it kills bacteria, because that is absolutely true, it also kills the good bacteria in your gut, and the destruction of that good bacteria in your gut can lead to things like leaky gut syndrome and has all sorts of issues, and there are ways to deal with those issues, and we'll talk about those.
When I went to school for integrative nutrition, I learned a lot about the gut, but this is alarming that alcohol was originally built for medicinal purposes to kill bacteria on wounds, and now we're putting that in our body, and now we're understanding more of the gut biome. It's actually destroying our gut.
It will kill cells. It damages and kills cells, and it is indiscriminate as to which cells it damages and kills. Now, that's a problem, obviously, and the body deals with that problem by using another component of the NAD biochemical pathway to convert acetaldehyde into something called acetate. Acetate is actually something that your body can use as fuel. And that process of going from ethanol to acetaldehyde to acetate does involve the production of a toxic molecule, right? Again, acetaldehyde is really toxic. And NAD, and if we want to get technical, it's the NAD to NADH ratio, and that chemical step is the rate limiting step to ethanol's metabolism. What does that mean for you? What that means is that if your body can't do this conversion of ethanol to acetaldehyde to acetate fast enough, well, acetaldehyde will build up in your body and cause more damage. And cells within the liver are very good at this conversion process, but they are cells and they are exposed to the acetaldehyde in the conversion process. And so cells within the liver really take a beating in the alcohol metabolism events. So the key thing to understand here is that when you ingest alcohol, you are, yes, ingesting a poison, and that poison is converted into an even worse poison in your body, and some percentage of that worse poison is converted into a form of calories that you can use to generate energy, generate ATP. And the reason why alcohol is considered empty calories is because that entire process is very metabolically costly, but there's no real nutritive value of the calories that it creates. You can use it for immediate energy, but it can't be stored in any kind of meaningful or beneficial way. It doesn't provide any vitamins. It doesn't provide any amino acids. It doesn't provide any fatty acids. It's truly empty calories.
The fact that there's no nutritional content in alcohol makes it alarming. If I have a person who wants to work with me and they are a bit overweight, the first thing I make them do is cut or at least limit how much alcohol they can have, including sodas, juices, and things like that. Once they remove that, they usually drop pounds immediately.
Result in more cortisol, more of this so-called stress hormone being released at baseline when they are not drinking. This is really important. People who drink a bit, and when I say a bit, I don't mean 1 or 2 sips or even a glass of wine every once in a while. I mean, again, people that are maybe having 1 drink a night with dinner and maybe on the weekend a few more. Again, I offer a bunch of different patterns to explain how it could also be 2 or 3 drinks on Friday, or 6 drinks only on Saturday. Well, all of those groups experience increases in cortisol release from their adrenal glands when they are not drinking. And as a consequence, they feel more stressed and more anxiety when they aren't drinking. This is a seldom talk about effective alcohol because so often we hear about the immediate effects of alcohol, right? And we've been talking about some of those effects. Effects like reducing the amount of stress. I mean, how many times have we heard somebody say, oh, I need a drink, and then they have a drink and they're like, calm down. Now they can shake off the thoughts about the day's work. They can start to think about things in a maybe more grounded or rational way, or at least they believe that, or they can somehow just relax themselves. Well, while that very well may be true, that it can relax them, when they are not drinking, that level of cortisol that's released at baseline has increased substantially.
Alcoholism can be in your genes?
And brains. In any event, you have a brain, you have a gut. That gut runs from your throat down to the end of your intestine. Your gut and your brain communicate by way of nerve cells, neurons and nerve connections, the vagus nerve in particular, and by way of chemical signaling. Your gut also communicates by way of chemical signaling, and believe it or not, by way of neural signaling too, to your liver. And as we talked about earlier, the liver is the first site in which alcohol is broken down or metabolized into its component parts. The liver is also communicating with the brain through chemical signaling and neural signaling. So we have the gut-liver-brain axis. And what you find is that people who ingest alcohol at any amount are inducing a disruption in the so-called gut microbiome, the trillions of little microbacteria that take resident in your gut and that live inside you all the time and that help support your immune system and that literally signal by way of electrical signals and chemical signals to your brain to increase the release of things like serotonin and dopamine and regulate your mood, generally in positive ways. Well, alcohol really disrupts those bacteria. This should come as no surprise. I mean, earlier we talked about this, and it's well known if you want to sterilize something, you want to kill the bacteria, you pour alcohol on it. Alcohol kills bacteria, and it is indiscriminate with respect to which bacteria it kills. So when we ingest alcohol and it goes into our gut, it kills a lot of the healthy gut microbiota. At the same time, the metabolism of alcohol in the liver, which you now understand, that pathway involving NAD, acetaldehyde, and acetate, you've now got disruption of the gut microbiota. As a consequence, the lining of the gut is disrupted, and you develop, at least transiently, leaky gut. That is, bacteria that exist in the gut, which are bad bacteria, can now pass out of the gut into the bloodstream. So you've got a two-hit kind of model here. In biology, we talk about two-hit models. That is kind of a 1 + 1 = 4. And it's generally, when you hear two-hit, it's not a good thing. So you've got bad bacteria from partially broken down food moving out of the gut. The good bacteria in the gut have been killed. You might say, why does the alcohol kill the bad bacteria in the gut? Well, the bad bacteria that are from partially digested food oftentimes escape the gut before the alcohol can disrupt them. And so now you've got leaks in the gut wall. You've got the release of this bad bacteria. You've got inflammatory cytokines and other things being released from the liver. And they are able to get into the brain through what's called a neuroimmune signaling. The net effect of this is actually to disrupt the neural circuits that control regulation of alcohol intake. And the net effect of that is increased alcohol consumption. So this is just terrible, right? I mean, you take in something that disrupts two systems, the gut microbiota, and it disrupts it in two ways. It's killing the good gut microbiota, and it's allowing the bad bacteria to move from the gut into the bloodstream. You've also got pro-inflammatory cytokines coming from the liver, and those converge or arrive in the brain and create a system in which the neural circuits cause more drinking. That's a bad situation. And this is why people who drink regularly, even if it's not a ton of alcohol, again, of the sorts of patterns of drinking I talked about before, and certainly for those that are chronic heavy drinkers, what you end up with is a situation in which you have inflammation in multiple places in the brain and body, and the desire to drink even more and to further exacerbate that inflammation.
Even more info on the disruption in your gut biome and the effects that has not only on your body, but your brain.
Hangover. Hangover is a constellation of effects ranging from headache to nausea to what's sometimes called hangxiety, which is anxiety that follows a day of drinking. Hangxiety, I think we can understand physiologically if we think about that process of alcohol intake increasing the amount of cortisol and the ratio of cortisol to some other stress hormones. That well explains why some people wake up the day after or even the day after a night drinking and feel anxious and not well and stressed for reasons they don't understand. Now, the other aspects of hangover, such as the stomach ache or headache or feelings of malaise or fogginess, those can be related to a number of different things and probably are related to a number of different things. First of all, the sleep that one gets after even just one glass of wine or a beer is not the same sleep that you get when you don't have alcohol circulating in your system. When alcohol is present in the brain and bloodstream, that the architecture of sleep is disrupted. Slow wave sleep, deep sleep, and rapid eye movement sleep, all of which are essential for getting a restorative night's sleep, are all disrupted. So for those of you that are drinking a glass or two of wine or having a hard liquor drink or a beer in order to fall asleep, the sleep you're getting is simply not high quality sleep, or certainly not as high quality as the sleep you'd be getting if you did not have alcohol in your system. Of Of course, when we're talking about hangover, we're talking generally about the consumption of more than just 1 or 2 drinks. Of course, for some people, 1 or 2 drinks is probably sufficient to induce hangover, but for most people, it's going to be having 3 or 4, exceeding their typical limit, as it's called. Again, not the legal limit, that's a whole other business. But when one ingests too much alcohol, for them, one of the reasons they feel terrible the next day is because their sleep isn't really good sleep. In fact, it's not even sleep. It's often considered pseudo-sleep, or at least that's what it's called in the sleep science field, because people are in kind of a low-level hypnotic kind of trance. It's not real sleep. There are multiple bouts of waking up. They may not even realize they're waking up multiple times. Okay, so there's the sleep-induced effects. Then there are the disrupted gut microbiome effects, some of which we talked about earlier, so now you understand the mechanism of alcohol destroying good, healthy gut microbiota, which then leads to leaky gut and things of that sort. Hangover and headache, we know that that's caused by vasoconstriction, the constriction of blood vessels that tends to occur as a rebound after a night of drinking. Alcohol can act as a vasodilator. It can dilate the blood vessels. Part of that is associated with the increase in so-called parasympathetic tone. We have an autonomic nervous system. It's got a sympathetic component. These are neurons that make us more alert, and if they're very active, they make us very stressed. There's also the parasympathetic aspect of the autonomic nervous system. This is all just fancy geek speak for the parts of your brain and body, the nerve cells that make you very relaxed. When you're very relaxed, there tends to be vasodilation. It allows for more movement of blood and other things through the bloodstream. And alcohol tends to induce some vasodilation, at least in some of the capillary beds. And then when the alcohol wears off, there's vasoconstriction and people get brutal headaches.
I've always wondered about hangovers. I don't know about you, but hangovers suck, and definitely never felt alive and well after a night of drinking.
I know a number of people are going to ask, perhaps are screaming, is drinking good for me in any way? For instance, many people have probably heard that resveratrol is good for people, and that red wine is enriched in resveratrol. I hate to break it to you, but the reality is that if indeed resveratrol is good for us, and there's some debate about this, some people say strongly yes, some people say no, other people say maybe, the amount of red wine that one would have to drink in order to get enough resveratrol, in order for it to be health promoting, is so outrageously high that it would surely induce other negative effects that would offset the positive effects of resveratrol.
I always thought red wine was healthy. I mean, I'm a health coach, and I would say red wine is good in small doses, obviously, but the fact that you would need that much to even be considered healthy, I don't know.
The more alcohol people drink, the greater their increase of cancer, in particular breast cancer. And that's because of the fact that alcohol has these effects on cells that include changes in gene expression. And cancer, that is the growth of tumors, is a dysregulation in cell cycles. Right? A tumor is a aggregation or the proliferation. Aggregation is stuff sticking together, by the way. Proliferation is stuff duplicating. A proliferation and aggregation of cells that could be a gliomas, glial cells, glioma, brain tumor, right? It could be lymphoma, so within the lymph tissue, etc. The mutations that alcohol induces to cause this are wide-ranging. Some cancers proliferate and take hold and cause serious problems when the proliferation of cells exceeds the immune system's ability to gobble up and remove those cells. There are other mechanisms of regulating cancers, but that's one of the primary ones. And alcohol hits it, again, as a two-hit model. It increases tumor growth and it decreases the sorts of molecules that suppress and
Cancer risk? I mean, come on.
in which alcohol can increase the aromatization of testosterone to estrogen. Now, in females, this may be part of the reason why there's an increase in estrogen-related cancers. Breast cancer can be either estrogen-related or non-estrogen-related. There are other types of estrogen-related cancers outside of breast cancer, but it appears that one reason why alcohol increases the risk of breast cancer is because of this aromatization of testosterone, to estrogen. In males, accelerated or abnormal conversion of testosterone to estrogen can actually lead to growth of the breast tissue in males, so-called gynecomastia, or other effects of high estrogen, or I should say of altered testosterone-estrogen ratios, because that's really what's important. And these can include things like diminished sex drive, increased fat storage, and a number of other things that I think most people would find to be negative effects. This has been shown that small amounts of alcohol ingestion, so 5 grams or so of alcohol ingestion, this would be half a glass of wine or half a glass of beer, at least in some studies showed increases in testosterone, which was kind of surprising. But I should point out, other studies have shown that alcohol ingestion causes decreases in testosterone over time. So there's always this issue of whether or not you're looking at a study of acute exposure versus chronic exposure, one dose versus multiple doses and exposure. I think it's fair to say, based on my read of the literature, this review and other reviews that focus more particularly on humans, that regular ingestion of alcohol is going to increase estrogen levels, whether or not you're male or female, and it's largely doing that through the aromatization process by increasing the aromatase enzyme. Yes, there's some dose dependence, but I think if you're somebody who's trying to optimize your testosterone to estrogen ratio, regardless of whether or not you're male or female, well, then most certainly you're going to want to avoid drinking too much alcohol.
Hormones have been huge in what I've been reading recently. So to understand that this change from testosterone to estrogen when drinking alcohol. Guys, it may not seem so manly to be drinking those drinks. Through absorbing all of this information, whether that's the Huberman podcast, which is just one aspect of the research I did for this YouTube video, but also the podcasts I've listened to throughout the years, the books, the articles, and even friends. And that leads me to just choosing to quit 100%. No drinks at all. And I'm not telling anyone here. I just want you all to have the facts, the data, and to make that decision yourself, whether you decide to remove it completely like I have, or you decide to lessen your intake and be very cautious. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I started to lessen my alcoholic intake about a year ago. I'd have maybe 1 or 2 drinks at like once a month, whether I was with friends at a bar or at a dinner with my partner. And as I've done with coffee in the past, where I quit it because I realized it was taking over me, I wonder, was alcohol really controlling me? Did I make the decision like, I understand I'm going to have this, or was I being peer pressured into it, or feeling like I needed to because everyone else around me was doing it? I wanted to fit in. So I always say, does it control you, or do you control it? And are you able to make the decision? Is it worth really getting trash? There are other ways to feel good without the use of alcohol and drugs. And if you are inspired to get off alcohol or minimize the impact of alcohol, here are a few tips that can totally help you out. So one is own your choice. If you decide to do it, own it. Don't feel bad about it. Just understand the consequences that it's going to have on your body in the future, and mitigate those risks by utilizing some of the things I'm going to talk about in a bit. Don't care what others think. Some people may look at you weird, or they may say like, oh, that's weird, and they may say something to you. Whatever it is, it's just not useful to you, and it doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter to you. The best line to use is, I'm not drinking right now. And if you don't want to be the weird one out, or if everyone's cheersing for something, just get yourself a sparkling water with some lime, or my favorite is the sparkling Martinelli's. Yeah, you'll feel like a little child. That's usually what they give to kids on New Year's Day. And feel it in your heart that all of this is a marketing ploy. Whether that's you're not man enough because you don't drink, because things like Dos Equis, or you won't drink the beer, the whiskey, those quote unquote manly drinks. Or you're not woman enough because you're not having wine and relaxing with your ladies. Don't ever let that control you. Again, do you have control over it, or does it have control over you? And what's cool is that more, like I said earlier, more and more restaurants are actually providing non-alcoholic drinks. So pay attention to those. Ask your waitress and they'll be accommodating for you. And sometimes even the bar will create a concoction for you that's non-alcoholic but tasty. But if you do drink, I want to end with this. If you do decide to drink, there are a few things you can do. Start with eating foods prior and after that help the gut. Eating and drinking fermented foods. You have things like kombucha, you have sauerkraut, kimchi. There's a lot of different varieties of fermented foods. You could do a quick Google search and then go find those at your local grocery store, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, things like that. When I learned from Huberman, actually, I learned this a while back from Anthony Bourdain, was for every drink that you drink a glass of water. Huberman actually recommends 2 glasses of water. Keep yourself hydrated by adding some electrolytes to your water, especially before you drink, and then after you drink, and then the morning you drink. Depending on your body, water requirements differ for every person. So I'm pretty sure you can find a calculator out there, add your height, add your weight, and then it will provide you the amount of daily water intake. And remember, those are only estimates. If you feel thirsty, even though you're having what the estimate provided, you need a little bit more. And it's really dependent on, did you sweat that day? If you're drinking, you're going to need more than usual. Add a little pinch of salt, unless you have high blood pressure. There are other ways to add hydration, and they have companies that already do like liquid IV, Element, things like that, provide electrolyte, and that's only if you have the money to do so. But if you're trying to do this minimally with less financial cost, your table salt should be good enough. And I'm talking about a little pinch. Staying fit and healthy through your lifestyle. So taking care of yourself daily, working out, doing yoga, some form of movement, long walks, things like that will really keep you healthy so that you can mitigate the risk from drinking. So you can still enjoy your drink once a week. I recommend if you're going to have a drink a day. Huberman doesn't recommend it, but it would pretty much be like 6 ounces of wine, which is not a lot, honestly. So you just have to be willing to take that risk if you decide to drink a little bit more. Well, that's it, folks. I really hope you enjoyed this video and that it was supportive and helpful for you. With that being said, if you enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments below so I can make more about these things and how you can keep yourself healthy, fit, strong. If you enjoyed and you're here this long and you're not subscribed or have not liked the video or commented, please do so. It can help the almighty algorithm gods to support others in finding this video. Much love, y'all. I'll see y'all soon. Peace.